The Santa Lucia Conservancy is a land trust storing 18,000 acres of the 20,000-acre Santa Lucia Preserve in Carmel Valley, California. The preserve is home to just over 5,000 acres of California grasslands in a landscape that merges with oak woodlands, redwood forests, coastal scrub, and California chaparral. Many of our grasslands have a density of native California grassland species far greater than the suggested 10% threshold to be considered a native grassland. We implemented grazing as a response to a problem. Although our land was protected and monitored, the disturbance regimes that had shaped our ecosystems for millennia had largely ceased to exist. Prior to colonization, this land was stored by the Rumson-Ohlone and impacted by both wild and anthropogenic fires, human management, and a thriving herbivore population. Then, for nearly 2 centuries, the land was used as a cattle ranch until the 1990s, when livestock were removed from the preserve. Roughly 2 decades after removing livestock, our grasslands were visibly declining. They were tinged with gray as a result of oxidization, overgrowth, and thatch buildup. Our California tiger salamander and grassland bird populations, both species known to benefit from some types of grazing, were declining. Each spring seemed less colorful than the last, as our wildflowers were choked by non-native annual grasses. So, in 2013, the Conservancy began a conservation grazing program to bring back intermittent disturbance to the landscape. To begin our project, the Conservancy partnered with the Dorrance family, local ranchers with a wealth of grazing knowledge and a deep commitment to conservation, to establish a grazing program on the preserve for the explicit purpose of ecosystem management. Our program's overarching goal was to reintroduce the disturbance cycle. By doing this, we sought to maximize biodiversity, improve soil health, break the dominance of invasive species, manage shrub encroachment through trampling, breaking, and limiting their habitat, reducing fuel loads, and supporting a resilient landscape in the face of drought, climate change, and wildfire. While fire is an integral part of our California coastal ecosystems, our fires have become too hot and too large, making this additional element of our grazing program increasingly essential. Being a science-based institution, the grazing program was developed in tandem with a floristics monitoring program composed of 27 non-grazed, permanent exclosure plots. Every spring, we collect species-specific floristics data from these ungrazed exclosures and adjacent grazed plots to better understand how the grasslands are responding to our management. Starting small, the program began with just 40 head of cattle, with the expectation that the program would grow. We have steadily been increasing our cattle herd size over the last 8 years. Additionally, in 2014 and 2015, we had the opportunity to graze our grasslands with 1,400 goats, which acted as a reset by removing years of thatch buildup and knocking back brush encroachment. Today, our cattle herd is 121 head, but we plan to scale up to 150 in order to more fully manage the grasslands of the preserve. Our grazing program staff consists of 3 people, and we manage 97 Angus females, 5 Corriente females, and 20 spring of 2020 calves. We build our fences on foot, due both to the hilly and steep terrain that we graze and the desire to mitigate any soil and flora compression caused by vehicles. We use a single strand of electrified polywire to keep our 121 cows in our fields, and only add a second one when we have young calves. We rely on respectful, trained cattle that respond to both our fencing and our on-foot cattle moves conducted mostly by calling the cattle from one pasture to another, often through a series of aisles, rugged trails, and over-paved roads. Being a program dedicated to conservation has made us adaptive and innovative in our management and planning. We manage in accordance to the ecosystems within which we graze. Of course, we follow the grass to some degree, but we respond to the conditions of the grasslands above all. With our 121 cattle, we remain nimble, an intentional decision allowing us to switch up the season, intensity, and footprint of our grazing in any given pasture. It also helps us to weather drought, wildfire, and any other challenges nature may throw at us. Being a conservation program, our grazing is limited by ecological factors. We try to avoid slopes over 30%, grazing soil that is shallow or fragile, and any areas that are particularly prone to erosion. We also manage our riparian areas to only graze where they would benefit rather than be disturbed by the presence of cattle. As we plan our moves, we take into consideration the needs and timing of our wildlife monitoring and weed management programs. Since the Conservancy was established in 1995, we have conducted monitoring on the preserve, and these baseline datasets informed the motivation and establishment of our grazing program. They continue to guide its implementation and adaptation. For example, we graze tiger salamander breeding ponds to reduce the choking vegetation, and we exclude the ponds when the tiger salamanders and red-legged frogs are laying eggs to give them room to thrive. Our weed management program incorporates a highly targeted and intentional approach to managing our landscape's invasive flora. Our grazing and weed programs move across our landscape sequentially, working off of each other, adapting to the individual particularities of our complex ecosystems and the challenges they pose. Monitoring working landscapes and, in particular, working rangelands is a complicated task. And, what's more, monitoring and collecting data does not equate results. Not only is significant analysis required, but also thoughtful interpretation. As is the experience of many in the land management world, it is a formidable challenge to evaluate the grassland's response to our management at a landscape scale under ever-changing weather and livestock considerations. Despite the challenges, the changes we are seeing on the ground are very exciting. Less thatch, increasing native perennial grasses, and the return of tiger salamanders and burrowing owls. We now look to our monitoring data to understand the specific drivers of these changes and how to adapt the program to further our objectives. The data used in our analysis and evaluation of the programs represent plant, wildlife, and soil surveys, many of which have been conducted since the grazing program's inception in 2013. Each year, we conduct extensive species-specific floristics inventories, cataloging the diversity in our exclosures compared to adjacent grazed plots. We monitor the residual dry matter of our pastures, comparing grazed and ungrazed areas to identify the impacts of grazing on small patches of land. We map our invasive weed populations and track shifts and responses to management. We recently conducted soil sampling for carbon baselines, and we have annual wildlife surveys tracking the populations of California tiger salamanders, California red-legged frogs, tricolored blackbirds, grassland breeding birds, and our raptor populations. Additionally, we have formed an academic partnership with the USDA ARS and are currently working on developing a high-resolution soil map. This work is contributing to a larger project of building some of the first ecological site descriptions and state and transition models for California. We, alongside experts from the USDA, are working on the over 8 years of data from these monitoring efforts and hope to publish papers explaining our results in the next couple of years. But we have seen positive trends. Our native grasses are increasing, allowing many of our grasslands to far exceed the 10% threshold for preserved grasslands in California. We have seen an increase in grassland productivity and a reduction of invasive flora coming from the tandem work of our cattle and weed management programs. The cumulative results of these efforts will give us the data needed to more appropriately adapt our management to the land. Although our grazing program exists within a 20,000-acre bubble, and we are not a for-profit program, we still function within a human community, and, as a result, have to deal with the complications posed by operating in a residential setting. Our 20,000 acres are dotted by 300 building envelopes, and about half currently have homes. It is not unusual for our pastures to go right up to someone's backyard. When a cow gets out, it may find itself wandering around a homeowner's landscaping or an outdoor pool. Our pastures are crisscrossed by a network of recreational trails and roads with their accompanying traffic. On top of residential infrastructure, our program itself has no permanent infrastructure. Our portable, wildlife-friendly fencing is easy for humans, animals, and weather to displace. With this, too, comes the challenge of needing to physically build a new pasture every time we want to move our cows. And, with our rotational grazing system, such a need arises often. The complexity of our program and our grazing is limited to a human speed. Although we await our data analysis, the dramatically improved vitality that we see daily, building our fences and taking care of our cattle, is pointing towards positive results. Grazing, as a land management tool, provides an opportunity to address many of our planet's current challenges by providing ecosystem services, biodiversity support, wildfire mitigation, and food production, among many other potential benefits. Our program seeks to show such benefits, and looking toward the future, we hope to serve as a model for the use of grazing as a land management tool whose potential exceeds the bounds of meat production. We would, however, like to refrain from swinging the pendulum too far. Science has shown that ecosystem degradation can be caused by grazing. But we have hope. Hope that for other land trust producers and policymakers alike, our grasslands may serve as a living, thriving testimony to the conservation potential of grazing.